Deo Onda from University of the Philippines, who's going to talk to us about microplastic monitoring in the Philippines. So welcome, Deo.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Andrew and the team again and the organizers for the invitation to be here. I'm very glad to see other studies and other efforts being done around Southeast Asia. Let me just share my slide. Okay. Can you see this now? Are you seeing the
Yes,
slide?
perfect.
Okay. So I think the objective of this presentation is just really to give an overview of what we have been doing in the Philippines, some of the challenges that we've encountered as we progress in the development of the methods and also in research itself for plastics pollution. And I think a very good opportunity to also share to you some of the possible platforms for collaboration, not with the Philippines and the other countries in Southeast Asia. So just a brief introduction. I am actually a microbial oceanographer in training. I did a lot of work in the Arctic to the tropics. I'm still doing a lot of work in the poles. But when I arrived in the Philippines in 2018, I think as just like many other countries in Southeast Asia, there has not been much effort or work done in terms of plastics pollution. And so I took on the challenge, I guess, of doing work on this. And my come in or my entry to the area is really on the microbes that are attaching to plastics. And later on, I realized if I wanted to understand plastics pollution, I should also be understanding their occurrence in the environment. And that's one problem in the Philippines. How there's not much work that has been done on plastics in general. So I needed to expand the field of research into plastics quantification. So I think this has already been discussed a couple of times, and I echo the sentiment, of our colleagues from Malaysia. We have been classified as the third in a paper by Yambek in 2017, and the fifth largest contributor to plastics pollution in another paper in 2021. But the thing is that the Philippines actually does not have a very comprehensive data set to either reject or validate and to see if we are really improving with all the interventions that we have been implementing in the country. So again, just like many of you, the problem in the country is that we don't have a very good baseline or comprehensive database or baseline information on plastics pollution. And this is problematic because I think Yuna is here. It was suggested that, it's not just the land that is contributing to the pollution in the marine environment, but also those are of maritime. And that 75% of this are from uncollected or mismanaged waste. And this is very significant in the Philippines because the Department of Environment and Natural Resources of the Philippines itself reported that in 2019, around 65% of the land of the dump sites in the Philippines are illegal, which means that they are not being monitored, they are substandard, and they are not actually should not actually be there. And 65% is a lot in an archipelago of 7,641 islands. This also means that because these are illegal, there is a higher likelihood that many of the trash, including the plastics that are deposited in these dump sites, actually go or leak into the marine environment. And the way here is that the Philippines has a lot of rivers. We have big deltas, we have big riverine systems, and this shows you paper by Le Breton indicating that many of the rivers that are contributing to the marine plastics pollution are actually also found in Southeast Asia. And in the Philippines, we have around seven, seven of the largest largest rivers that are polluting the oceans are actually found in the Philippines, and around five of them are found in Manila Bay, only just in Manila Bay. Manila Bay is near the center, which is Manila, and around five big rivers are contributing to this plastics pollution. But the thing is that we were also interested not only in the source and where do they go, but as an oceanographer, we were also interested in asking, okay, if after leaving the coast of the Philippines or of Manila Bay, where do these plastics actually go? So we've done a lot of sea surface counting using different techniques. We've optimized different methods, and we found that in Manila Bay itself, there are around 40,000 pieces. On average, there are around 40,000 pieces of plastics floating. It's a lot. And the question is that where do they go? Do they sink? Do they accumulate on the coast? So many would accumulate on the coast, many would actually sink, but because Manila Bay is part of a larger oceanic system, which is the South China Sea, a lot of part of the gyre, many of these plastics would go out of Manila Bay and then join the larger South China Sea. So we have done a lot of expeditions to the Spratlys Island group in the claimed areas of the Philippines called the West Philippine Sea or the Kalayaan Island group. And we visited several isolated islands and features. You know, the South China, the middle of the South China Sea, particularly the Spratlys Island group, is a hotly contested area. But we have made some good strides in actually doing scientific expeditions in the areas claimed by the Philippines. And this is what we found. We found a lot of plastics accumulating in the coasts of the different islands. I was also invited by Taiwan to visit Itoab or Taiping Island, and it's the same thing that we found. But the thing is that because these islands are uninhabited, and even the inhabited ones, such as Taiping Island, have their own recycling facility and 100% recuperation of the plastics that they are producing, the question is, where do these plastics could be coming from? So, for example, this is the Pag-asa Island, the largest island that the Philippines has in the Spratlys Island group, and this is really saddening because these islands are very far, you know, and no one lives there. But this is what you'd find: a lot of plastics actually accumulating in their coasts. And when we did several, we've done a couple of surveys in the area trying to understand where do these plastics could be coming from. We went back to those products that have labels and found out that around 60% of the plastics that you would find, at least those that still have labels, are actually not from the Philippines. Many of them are also coming from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Thailand, from Vietnam, from Taiwan and mainland China, and of course the Philippines. So it just tells us really that whatever we release from the coast, they're gonna go somewhere, and that somewhere are the far away ecosystems in the middle of the South China Sea. This is also some of the trash that we've seen. Some of them are even fresh, suggesting again, as what Lyons has suggested in their paper, that many of the plastics are also coming from marine or maritime in origin, such as the fisheries vessels and other ships around the area. We've also done a lot of dives in the middle of the South China Sea, and we've seen several indications of human contamination, including ghost nets and discarded fishing gears. You know, the area is a very productive in terms of fisheries. That's why there's a swarm of fisheries vessels that go there every year. If this is the situation in one area, it is not impossible that the same situation is also found in almost all around the South China Sea or the Spratlys Island group. The thing is that, as discussed earlier, plastics do not stay afloat, or they do not all accumulate on the coast. Many of them will sink. Studies in the north of the South China Sea, such as in Sishay Bay Canyon, found that there is already a piling or accumulation of plastic debris at around 1,000 meters. In an expedition that we did, for the first time, we visited and dived the Emden Deep, which is in the Philippine Trench, which is the third deepest place on Earth. It's the same thing that we found. We found accumulation of and piling up of plastics. So this is the expedition that we did last time. And so this is at around 10,100 meters, and this is what these are the things that we saw. Not megalodons, not sea creatures, but actually piles and piles of intact plastics. It just tells us that, they can go far, but they can also go down, even if that down is around 10,000 meters below. And that's very scary because we don't even know what kind of ecosystem there is down there and how we are already changing these environments without even realizing it. So in the Philippines, just like, again, many of the Southeast Asian countries, the problem is that we do not have a standardized, we do not have a comprehensive data, primarily because we also do not have an organized and a systematic way of collation of the data. The Philippines still does not have a standardized method. So one of the things, or one of the challenges that we took up, is to come up with a standardized method for data collection in the Philippines, to make the results and the data actually very much comparable. But so this is what we did with a project that we had with the funding that we got from the Philippine government to actually come up with a handbook for quantifying plastics in the marine environment. But again, as I've discussed earlier, if we want to understand the context of the Philippines, we also need to understand the context of the Southeast Asian region, because the entire ecosystem of the South China Seas are actually connected with each other. So our data should also be comparable with the other Southeast Asian countries. So to do this, we've worked with a consortium called Microquib. It is led by University of Portsmouth, I think with NUS, with Vietnam, Thailand, and also Malaysia and Indonesia. We tried to come up with a method that we can all use in all of the studies that we are working on to make the data around Southeast Asia very much comparable. So monitoring again is important because it sets the baseline on the extent and gravity of the problem. It allows us to understand the types of plastics that are most problematic. It also allows us to evaluate the efficiency of the mitigation measures being implemented, and allows us to actually visualize the problem. And hopefully this visualization would elicit behavioral change. So to test the method that we've developed together with the Microquib consortium, we've done several expeditions and surveys around the Philippines, especially in the west coast of the Philippines, trying to understand how would it vary coming from the point source, which is in Manila Bay, and in islands such as the Palawan, the long island that you find in above Sabah is the Palawan Island, which is facing the Sulu Sea, the inland Sulu Sea, and facing the South China Sea. And what is the trend as you go really far out in the Spratlys Island group? And the idea here is that as you increase the distance from the point sources, the plastics accumulation or number should also be going down or reduced. And the thing is that in all of this, I think we had around 72 or 82 stations that we visited last year alone. In this year, I mean, in 2021. And the sad thing is that we went to very far islands, we went to very far places. And the sad thing is that there is no single place in the Philippines that we visited that has no plastics. You find plastics everywhere. So that in itself is already very much alarming. And what you're seeing here is the Manila Bay. So it just really confirms our the hypothesis before that Manila Bay is a point source for plastic. And this is what we found, the highest accumulation actually being in the mouth of the Pasig River in Manila Bay. And then we also went to Palawan, and we found that there is higher accumulation still when the sites are near the communities, but there's also a decrease in abundance as you go into the open oceans. Although you find a lot of plastics in Pag-asa Island in the middle of the South China Sea, they are still lower than what we find near communities or near the point sources. Some interesting observations we had is that there's really a difference in the type of plastic that you find along the coast and in the open ocean, such as in the Spratlys Island group. In Manila Bay, it's still the thin plastic wraps, the packagings, the labels that dominate the trash. But in Pag-asa Island, these are the styrofoam fragments, very buoyant materials. And it makes sense because one, they're very buoyant, and they're also being used for fisheries or fishing activities. We also wanted to understand if there's a difference if you're facing inside or inward the Philippines and outward the Philippines, and we found that there is still a sort of a correlation on the type of plastics that you find, but much of the types are very much associated or correlated with the type of economic activity. This is important because it allows us to understand transport of plastics, from one point to another, and then ask questions such as what types of materials are retained on the coast and what types of materials actually get transported farther. This is important, especially in policy recommendations, now that the Philippines is trying to come up with bans and priorities of what types of plastics to ban. These are very good basis on decision making. Our data also allowed us to sort of assess what types of environment, the level of vulnerability of the different marine coastal habitats when you look at the presence of the plastics and their accumulation. And we found that although there's a lot of plastics on the coast, it's really the mangrove areas across the Philippines. You go to Manila Bay, you go to the north of Philippines, the south, Palawan, offshore environments. The mangroves tend to have the highest accumulation of plastics among the different coastal habitats, mainly because the prop root system serve as filters, and then they do not they filter, they prevent the transport of the plastics from the terrestrial to the marine environment. Up until now, there's still very little literature on the studies on plastics pollution in the Philippines, and this really calls for more action on the part of the scientific community. Many of the studies were very much focused on marine mammals, marine mammal strandings and their ingestion, but there's not much on the different aspects and different levels of the trophic system. One good stride that the Philippines made this year is the adoption of a national plan of action on marine litter. It is a 7-point agenda, and the first agenda there is really to come up with the baseline information. This is big because it means that the government, the national government itself, is aligning its resources and aligning its priorities to fulfill the objectives of the national plan of action. It also means that there is a very good platform where the scientists who are producing the information can translate their data and information into policy. So this is really a good stride on the part of the government. On the part of the academe, there's still not much work that is being done. But I will be presenting to you some of the work that we've done, to also invite possible collaborations. One of the projects that we are implementing is called Plasmix. We're looking at plastics from the marine environment, their biodegradation, the release of greenhouse gases, their attachment, their role in dispersal of invasive species, to how these microplastics are being ingested in the trophic system, especially aquaculture related species, and how it's possibly affecting, the risks associated with the consumption of this contaminated seafoods. We're still continuing collaborations. We think that the way to go in order for us to come up with a very good data set, not only for the Philippines and the Southeast Asia, is really to have collaborations. But the thing is that we also need to understand that the effects of plastics cuts across trophic systems. They are affecting not only the large but the very small, the smallest organisms, and in every level of the trophic system. So this is my plastics research group. We've been looking at the different aspects of plastics microbes interaction, from the degradation to the transport, dispersal, biodegradation, fragmentation, to biomagnification, and even to biodeterioration and release of greenhouse gases. So I am also happy to share that there is a recognition that we do not have a very good comprehensive data set. So the Philippine government granted us a fund to come up with a project called the Plastic Count Pilipinas. The idea here is just to come up with a portal where we can integrate, visualize, and synthesize the data coming from the Philippines so we can have a more holistic understanding of the problem. We are doing this project with Dr. Isobe here and of course Andrew from the UK. And we're very excited. We will be learning applications of AI technology, for example, in estimating micro and macroplastics. There is also a problem in terms of capacity in the Philippines because there's no laboratory or facility that has been dedicated for microplastics research. So one of the efforts that we've done this year is to come up and establish this facility called Microquib, Microplastics Quantification, Identification, and Biodegradation Facility, in one of the remote laboratories we have in the north of the Philippines. It's a complete lab from collection to pre-processing to processing, quantification, identification, and even biodegradation assays. So hopefully with this, the Philippines can ramp up its efforts in understanding plastics pollution in the Philippines. So all of this will not be possible without, of course, the help of many collaborators we have, including Andrew and Dr. Isobe here. So with that, I hope I was able to give an overview of what we're doing in the Philippines, and we are excited to also work with all of you if there is any chance. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Deo. Do we have one very quick question? We are a little over time, so maybe in the interests of the break, maybe we should continue to the last presentation of this morning's session, which is looking at microplastic monitoring in Singapore and the Southeast Asian Microplastics database. And this is given by Una Lyons and Cheng Lim. So welcome. And are you going to share your screen with us?
Hello. Hi, I'm Cheng Ling, and I'll be presenting about the database that we have prepared and as part of our project. We call it the Regional Research Database 2.0, and there is history behind this database starting in 2019 by Yuna Lyons and back then her team. And now we have grown this inventory to quite a monster, and we would like to share with you some of the things that we have found through our inventory. So about the project, we are supported by UNEP, COPC, GPML, funding from the C Circular Project, Government of Sweden, and it's carried out by CIL's NUS in Singapore. We also have team members coming from TMSI in Singapore, and together over the past year, we have developed an inventory of marine plastic research in the region, being ASEAN Plus 3. And currently, our inventory contains around 700 publications, including both peer review and grade literature. All these publications are what we are able to find with our team effort through online databases, public domains, anything that is publicly available online that we can access and therefore pull out the information. We tried our best as much as possible to do justice to the information and compile it into our inventory. So our regional team is quite huge. We have more than 30 members coming from Southeast Asia, including Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, as well as a few others from Singapore as well. And a sneak peek into our inventory, obviously it's a monster and I will not be going through the inventory in great detail, but as you can see, there are various columns, there are many rows. Each of these are developed with this thing that we call metadata. So we actually go through each paper as though we are conducting an interview with a person, but we are conducting an interview with the article. So we will check with the article what are the different information that the article can provide us, especially in terms of whether there was a water body that was relevant and studied, whether there were microplastics studied, what are the contaminants examined within the research. So we went into great detail, especially in terms of methodology, whether there was field sampling, whether or not a biota species was sampled, whether there was modeling conducted, etc. and etc. And of course, we also went into details about the findings of the research, such as the shoreline sediment, how much plastics was found in different samplings, compartments, if conducted within the research. So from all of this information that we have gathered and compiled, we are also able to generate graphs, charts, various visualizations to tell us a little bit more about what can we see from the information that we have collected, both in terms of the regional kind of scope, as well as various different geographical lenses, such as if you're looking at a country, if you're looking at a specific water body, or even if you're looking for something like a specific research topic, we also have such information gathered that allows us to have this kind of analysis and insights. I will not be going through all of our graphs, but I will be selecting a few to go through today. So for instance, in terms of the regional microplastics research, we have captured a great number of literature. For instance, China currently has the most number of literature articles that we have captured within our inventory, currently at 249. And then for countries, Singapore, my own home country, we have 22 papers. And we have also broken down these articles into whether or not they were science topic related, humanities topic related, whether or not they were peer reviewed, or whether they were grey literature. And over the years, you can also see the spread of the literature articles, and there is definitely more interest in recent years compared to the past. There's still currently a dominant there's a dominant trend of seeing survey and monitoring pollution status kind of papers being published compared to something like education and outreach, the kind of social papers. Something else is we have also managed to pull out which papers are focusing on microplastics or have microplastics as part of their research scope. And you can see that the numbers fall a little bit from the overall numbers, but it's still quite a great proportion. So microplastics do make up quite a big proportion of research on marine plastics in the region. We have also broken it up. We are also able to see, like in the regional level, what are the commonly reported polymers of microplastics that were found. These are based on research that has done plastic characterization, meaning they went out into the field, they collected plastics, and then they went into a lab to characterize these plastic samples. So we can see that PE, PP, PS, and PET are very commonly reported. We can also see the shapes of these plastics that were commonly reported, such as fragment, fiber, film, and then the less common ones such as rod, flakes. So there's a great variety in these kinds of shapes being named, as well as the various polymers that have been examined. If we look at the various research topics in the region, we can see that survey and monitoring pollution status, as mentioned just now, is the dominant research topic. Second, comes in close, is ecological and environmental impacts, sources, and pathways. Within ecological and environmental impacts, we can see subtopics such as the ingestion of plastics in the wild, experimental studies of physiochemical impacts, microbial assemblages, and then within sources and pathways, we can see like accumulation zones and hotspots currently is very dominant in the sources and pathways research topics. Fragmentation and degradation also has a lot of interest. So each of these research topics were actually manually input by our research team. So we will go through each of these articles and examine which are the topics that are covered within each article, and then we'll record them in our inventory, which then allows us to conduct this kind of graphs and analysis kind of thing. So if we continue looking at the regional microplastics research, in terms of field sampling compartment, water surface and shoreline sediment are very commonly sampled compartments, and we can see the breakdown within each country as well. There's also some interest. Interestingly, this was something that we didn't expect, and then we subsequently added to our inventory. But atmosphere was something that has gained recent interest. So understanding how microplastics in the atmosphere can contribute towards microplastics occurring within marine environments. So I will actually be moving on to talk a little bit about Singapore based on the various research that we have collected. The numbers in Singapore are a little bit smaller. We managed to find 22 publications relevant to marine plastics in Singapore. And of these, 12 of them are relevant to microplastics, and then we break it down into 11 scientific and 1 humanities paper. In each of these articles, they were published 2004 to 2020, 9 out of 12 define microplastics as less than 5 millimeter. So this kind of information we also captured in our inventory, whether there was a size classification for each of the microplastics examined, microplastics, macroplastics, meso, nanoplastics examined within the articles. And if there is a certain so-called class size, then we'll record what is the size range that has been defined in the article as well. So then we are actually able to pull out information such as studies that did not specify their microplastic size range, or studies that use a different size range. So we actually cross-reference with GAZEM's idea of what is the plastic size and what is the plastic size class that falls under microplastics, etc., etc. Then we are also able to further pull out information such as whether or not they were desktop studies, whether a field sampling and analysis was conducted in that article, whether or not it's a pure laboratory study. So then, for example, using the Singapore articles, we have found that there are 6 literature reviews, and then in each of these reviews, how many articles were reviewed. In the field sampling studies, what were they actually examining? So for example, here they are looking at the microplastic presence and abundance. What were the compartments that were examined? So in the case of Singapore, it was algae, seagrass samples, mangrove, mud flats, as well as shoreline sediment and water surface. And in terms of the laboratory studies, we also found these 2 papers, one that was on barnacles collected from Kranji, and one of it was the different types of commonly consumed shrimps and prawns found in Singapore's supermarkets. And with all the information that we have collected about Singapore's microplastics research, we're also able to pull out, okay, out of this research, the dominant topic is survey and monitoring pollution status, as with most countries in the region. And also, interestingly, these 2 are dominating: ingestion of plastics in the wild, research framework, and coordination. And then there are various other papers that cover a little bit about each of these topics. And we also saw, like, we are actually able to pull out as well the absence of certain research topics that are being covered. In the case of Singapore, we found no papers that were covering these topics here, which we're able to pull out this kind of information as well. And if we look further into Singapore's microplastics research, from our inventory, without even going into the papers itself, we can pull out information such as the separation techniques that were employed in each paper, density separation, flotation methods, whether they use identification tools for plastic characterization, and in these plastic characterizations, what polymers were found, what were the different shapes that have been recorded. And we can also look further into specific research. In one particular research, there was actually a profiling of communities of bacteria, and these key findings were recorded in our inventory about this research paper. So in terms of in Singapore, the take-home messages that we managed to glean just from looking through our inventory is that there is generally consistent microplastic size ranges being referred to. And unfortunately, for a country to have 22 papers is actually quite limited in terms of the publication that we can find on digital libraries. So it might be possible, based on our knowledge of the research intensity might actually be high. But the problem is if this information is not publicly available on internet resources, on public domains, then we're not actually able to get hold of these resources and publications, which also reflects how far this information can reach. So this research may not be able to reach a wider audience because they are not publicly available online. And when it comes to all of this information that we have collected, that we have developed, the inventory and all of that, we are trying to push for all this information to be publicly available and shared in the region, especially since mentioned by previous speakers, collaboration within the region is very important. So I'm actually going to show you a demonstration of our beta website. And in this case, I'll show you straight away into one of our pages, which is the data extraction. So previously, I showed you guys a very scary looking Excel sheet of many columns and rows, but we understand that it's not the most easy to use, especially when someone coming in with very little experience with data manipulation or extraction. So we actually designed our website to have like one section where there is a table that you can customize for your own research interest or even for your own reading pleasure if you prefer. So we actually designed our website to be easily used by not just scientists and data familiar people, but people who are interested in specific topics. Let's say I would like to look specifically only at geographical scale and the key findings. I can even narrow down the table to just these two columns, and then I can conduct a search for specific keywords that I want to see in order to further understand the research that's available in this ASEAN +3 region. So with that, I have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that fascinating insight into what is clearly an enormous piece of work. And I guess we're all sitting here thinking, I wish there was such a thing available for the entire globe and not just the Southeast Asian region. But at the moment, I'm not aware that there is. So maybe this is a fantastic model for how somebody somewhere with appropriate funding should grasp the opportunity to extend this kind of approach, because clearly, you know, it highlights that there is a vast amount of information available, but most of us aren't capable of finding it most of the time. So I think that is a really great contribution. So do we have any questions at this stage? No, I don't think there are any specific questions, but I'm sure there will be lots of interest and input and maybe people contacting you later. Moritz, you have a yes. Question.
Sorry, since nobody asked. I want to ask, is it automatically updated? Is there a process behind, or is it just all your busy fingers and people, or is there any automation in this kind of updating process?
So currently, in terms of when a new publication comes out, we don't really have a automated manner of finding that research and putting it to our inventory. So we're currently still relying on people giving us information about publications that are recently released. But after we have collected the publication and we have input the information into our inventory, everything on our website, everything on our graphs, our visualizations, we also have a map which I didn't show. All of this information will be automatically updated. So as long as we are able to grab that publication and add it to our inventory, everything else will be updated to be as recent as possible and contain like the most amount of information that we can gather.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So a action to everybody to send you the papers, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Umberto, you have a question as well.
Yes, I was wondering what is the plan on the long term, like how are you ensuring the sustainability of the website in terms of funding and people that have to look after the website? Do you have a precise strategy about that?
Well, we're hoping our best to keep this website as independent and as open and as like it's a lot of crowdsourced effort, and we're hoping to keep it for like that as long as we can. At the current moment, we are looking for the next stage for our project, because currently our project is still in the beta phase and the development is almost complete. So then now we're looking towards the next steps in terms of longevity. So it's actually a very good question, and answer is to be determined.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think it's clear to many of us the value of this, and I hope that you know, maybe regional governments will recognise the value of that kind of work. And we've heard some comments already today about lack of baseline data in various countries, or lack of easy access to that baseline data. Maybe it exists, but it's not easily found. And I think this kind of initiative is going to help a great deal in that direction. So, yeah, hopefully the region will see the opportunity to pursue this further.